If you love making animal themed cards that are quick and easy with minimal supplies and are oh so cute, then this is for you. In this video, I'll share 4 adorable cards I made with the cute House Mouse stamp collection from Spellbinders. For example, number 2 is the easiest coloring technique even if you aren't an artist, and number 4 is useful when you need a last minute card. Plus, you'll watch me completely goof up on one of the cards, but I also show you how to fix it and make it look intentional. So without further ado, let's start with card number 1. Oh, before I start, I have to show you this. I recently purchased these craft stacks boxes from Spellbinders and I'm loving them. They come in various combinations, but I got the one with a large and 2 medium during the Black Friday sale and got a really good deal. Their sales are usually amazing, and that's how I've been building up my stash besides the occasional products Spellbinders sends me to try out. So for this project, I'm using my craft stacks boxes to store the supplies I'll be using today. They're stackable, but you can also use the recessed lid to hold stuff. Alright, I just wanted to share this with you since I'm finding them really useful. I'll link them in the description if you're interested. Let's start with the easiest one first, shall we? Let's look at this stamp set. Spellbinders very kindly sent me a couple of these stamp sets to try out. These are from the House Mouse design series created by the talented Ellen Jarecki. I hope I'm saying her name right. I thought I'd create a few little cute cards with them. This is my first time using animal themed stamp sets, and this set is called Cheers and features cute little mud pie with a glass of wine on a grapevine. And these sentiments are lovely. Let's celebrate friendships, the wine of life, or savor life's sweet moments. And this simple one, let's celebrate. This is a red rubber cling stamp, which I've never used before, so I'm excited to try it out for the first time. I'm using some Brushstroke 300 GSM cold pressed watercolor paper for this one, which is both a smooth and a slightly textured side, and I'll use the smooth side for more even stamping. This paper is 25% cotton and perfect for watercoloring with distress oxides. I'm making an A2 size card and plan to use this piece of Lawn Fawn's Rainforest Green cardstock as the background for some nice contrast. Let me start with die cutting. I'll use the scored and pierced rectangles die set to create the layers. By the way, here's a quick hack to make accessing my dies easier. I've cut the packaging sides and use a paper clip to close up the opening once I'm done. I used to end up tearing the packaging anyway, so now it's intentional. Whatever mistakes I make, I like to just own them, as you'll see me do with the next card. Back to the card making, I'll ensure my background layer fits the stamp and sentiment. I'll also cut a second layer with a nice beveled edge for added detail. However, that plan didn't work since the smaller rectangle would be too small for the stamped image on the watercolor paper, as you can see. So you'll find me using the Fluted Classics rectangle etched die set later on to create the final beautiful etched border on the Rainforest Green layer. Now I have the perfect size for stamping, and I'll move on to the next panel for the card using the Fluted Classics rectangle dies. As usual, the frugal crafter in me will cut out a shape from the center of the cardstock since that won't be visible, and I'll save the cutout for a future card. This reduces a lot of waste and I can conserve expensive supplies, especially cardstock. Next, it's time for stamping. Since I'm working with a red rubber cling stamp, I need to adjust my stamping platform to ensure the height is appropriate. Now I'll align the stamp to bring it closer to the left edge, making room for the sentiment. I'll heat emboss the mouse so the ink becomes water resistant, which is essential for the watercoloring I plan to do. I'll apply some anti-static powder first so there's no extra powder clinging to the background, even though I'll be using clear powder which won't show. I'm using VersaFine Black Onyx ink for the stamping, and I'll stamp lightly a couple of times. I think I could have positioned the stamp a little more to one side, but anyway, it still looks great. I do have black embossing powder, but since I might get stray bits on the background, that might end up getting heat set and black specks would look really ugly. That's why I prefer to use black ink and clear embossing powder. Here you see me applying the powder and then tapping off any excess, and then I'm ready to heat set it. I prefer to apply heat on both sides of the panel to even out the warping as much as possible. I'll use these Distress Oxide inks for the watercoloring, Tumble Glass for the background, Victorian Velvet for the mouse's paws, face, and ears, Dusty Concord for the grapes and wine glass, Frayed Burlap for the mouse's body, and pine needles for the foliage. I'll use a water brush that I have handy, actually a smaller size for the more detailed parts and a slightly larger one for the background. It's really easy watercoloring with Distress Oxide, and I'll do a really loose watercoloring. This is such a cute stamp. I'll clean my brush right here, but it's better to have a jar of clean water. I was too lazy to get up and fetch one. I won't bore you to death watching me color everything in. You just saw the technique I'm using. To smoosh a little bit of ink on my acrylic block, add a couple of spritzes of water to the ink, and then paint with it. Once I'm done painting the entire image, I'll be back to show you the next steps. I've strayed outside the line here, so I'll just take some clean water and brush it out. Having watercolor paper is a really great idea because I can load it up with as much paint as I want and it won't buckle. See how easy it is? No fussing, no fiddling. I'll use my heat tool to dry it a little bit first. Doing this will also help flatten out the panel. You have to apply heat on both sides though for uniform results. You see, it's become so much flatter. I'm bending it ever so slightly while applying the heat tool so that it kind of bends back into shape. I'll use my Misty again, and I'll use the corner magnets to move the panel away from the edge, since putting the sentiment stamp near the edge may not allow for the stamp to make contact with the cardstock properly. I'm going to use the Let's Celebrate stamp with the pine needles Distress Oxide and stamp it right here. Since I'll heat emboss the sentiment, I'll use a little bit of anti-static powder first before stamping. It's impossible to have hundreds of different colors of embossing powders, so the best way to make sure your sentiment matches the colors in your design is to use the color you used and then use clear embossing powder over the ink. That gives you endless possibilities. I'm creating a landscape card, so this pre-scored card base won't do since it's already stamped with my logo for a portrait-oriented card. I need to get another card base, which I can do really fast by using the Nina Solar White Crest 110-pound cardstock. I usually prefer to use pre-scored card bases since I'm lazy and I don't have to prepare my own, but it shouldn't take more than a minute to make one from scratch. I like to score my cardstock on both sides, especially if it's thick like this 110-pound one, just so it folds really easily. I don't want my cardstock to crack, and the easiest way for me to burnish the card is to just use the silicone grip of my scissors. Alright, so now the card panel has cooled down. I'll add some dimensional foam tape to this layer and adhere it to the card base. The first thing I'll do is adhere the card panel to the base because I've removed the center and I want to make sure it's aligned and adhered properly. I'm going to use liquid glue for this to keep it flat. I'm not applying glue at the edges because it has a pierced edge and I don't want the glue to ooze through the openings. Now that it's all down, I'll take a strip of paper, apply some glue to it, and just slide it along the edge so there's no excess glue that can ooze out. Then I'll press the edge down really well. I'll do that on all four sides so it doesn't get snagged on anything. All right, so this is done. And I have this cute card number 1 done. Let's celebrate. Do you want to see what I did with the next one? The next one is really cute, and I'll show you the huge mistake I made and how I saved the card. Let's dive in. I'm using this stamp set called Squeaky Voice, and I love this cute syrup label that says Squeaky Voice Serum. Little Monica here is under the weather, so Amanda is taking care of her squeaky voice with an eyedropper full of medicine. It doesn't get any cuter. Since I have this 8.5 by 5.5 inch piece of cardstock left from my previous card, I'll use it for this card base as well. I'll score it at 4.25 inches on the long side and fold and burnish it well to create an A2 card. Next, I'll use this indigo cardstock from Spellbinders for the card panel and the craft one for the top layer, which I'll also use for stamping the image and sentiment. Both measure 4.25 by 5.5 inches to fit the A2 card base. I'm going to cut the craft cardstock in a semicircle using this round postage die set, and I'll use this Fluted Classics die set to create an etched border on the indigo cardstock for the base layer. I'll use the Wishing You a Speedy Recovery sentiment on this card, but let's complete the die cutting first. The size of the panel is perfect, so all I need to do is use the etch die to apply the design to the cardstock. However, I should have also used the cutting die along with it to get a smooth edge, which I realized only later. And as always, I'll cut out the center of the cardstock and save it for another project. This is where I laid the foundation for the massive goof up I mentioned at the start of the video. Keep watching to see how this disaster unfolds, and you can laugh at me or with me, your choice. I'll angle the dies a bit on the cutting platform since these are thicker dies and present a lot of resistance while going through the die cutting machine. This is another one of Gina K's tricks, and that's really helpful. Gina is the GOAT of crafting. The number of hacks I've learned from her, and also Jennifer Maguire and BB Cameron in the past year since I started making cards, has really improved my crafting game. If you're interested in seeing all of the hacks I learned in a video, let me know in the comments and I can create a hacks video soon. Next, I'll use the same Fluted Classics die and run it over my craft card panel. Since I want to layer this over the indigo panel, I want the bottom part of the craft panel to have the same etching as the indigo one so they match, which is why I ran this first. Next, I'll use a circle postage die to cut out the craft panel again, but first I need to make sure the stamped design as well as the sentiment will fit within the circle die. Now let's do the stamping, and then I'm going to heat emboss everything. I'll use my MIST with my sticky mat This way I know the panel won't shift if I need to repeat the stamping. Plus, the shape of this die cut is just easier to handle with a sticky mat. I'm going to be heat embossing, so I'll apply some anti-static powder first so the embossing powder doesn't stick everywhere. I'm using my VersaFine Onyx black ink again since it produces a really crisp image. All right, now I'll just hold on to this with my reverse tweezers and melt the embossing powder. Look at how cute this is. Absolutely adorable. I'll let this panel cool down a little bit while I clean up. All right, so now I want to get rid of the anti-static powder. See how it's looking cloudy and kind of grayish? So the first thing I'll do is very gently wipe this down with a dry Swiffer cloth. Next, I'm going to take a regular eraser and just erase around the heat embossing. I'm going to avoid going over the heat embossed areas because that will remove the shine from the heat embossing. I obviously don't want that. And I'm going over the panel very gently. Okay, most of it is gone now. So what I'll do is bring in this tiny detail eraser, which is actually an electric eraser. But in this situation, I won't use it on power mode because it's going to go really fast and probably remove some of the embossing. So I'm just getting in between those tiny areas just to get a little bit of the original craft color back. Getting close, but making sure I'm being very gentle. It takes a little bit of patience, but the craft color is actually 99% back. Wouldn't you agree? And that's how I remove all the anti-static powder from colored cardstock. As I was going to layer the heat embossed panel, well, this is what happens when you are a hoarder and all you can think about is saving and stretching your supplies. Okay, so now I have a couple of choices. Either create another card panel, which is going to be difficult since I used the last scrap of the indigo cardstock, or I have to use a different color and cut it out again. But I'm going to be creative and make this mistake look intentional. I'm going to put the panel back in here, but the intentionality will come if I raise it on dimensional just a little bit so it doesn't look like a dumb act on my part, but looks like it was meant to be that way. Oh, this is hilarious. I'm going to put foam tape here, and since this is a dark color, I don't want the foam tape to look stark. To avoid this, I'll take a black Sharpie and I'll just color the sides of the foam tape since I don't have black foam tape. You see, this way the white is camouflaged and it looks a little more finessed. Now I'll stick this down and I will apply some foam tape over here. Since the Sharpie might bleed through to the front, I want to make sure that I'm being light-handed and also stay away from the craft paper as much as possible. Now I'll apply glue on the top part that will sit on the raised rectangle. In hindsight, I think raising the craft paper panel over the rectangle would have been a better hack to disguise the boo-boo. I'll also add a little bit of foam tape on either side to reinforce them. Alright, this finally doesn't look too dumb, does it? Let me know in the comments what you thought about this cover-up. Now, if you love shaped cards but are afraid of trying them, just keep watching and I'll walk you through the process and simplify it for you so you can try it out on your next card project. Alright, I'm going to make another card using the squeaky voice set, but with a bit of a twist. I'll be using this essential 4-petal label etched die set from Spellbinders. I'm challenging myself to use more bright colored card bases because I usually stick to white, and I use the white hammermill piece for the front and inside panel. It's going to be a super simple, quick card. Before I proceed, let's get the die cutting out of the way. First, I'll cut 2 pieces of white cardstock because I'll need one for the front and the other one for the inside. This part is done and I now have the 2 pieces I need. I'm going to set these aside and explain what comes next. I want to create a shaped card, and to do this, I'll create a hinge by positioning the die slightly off the edge of the fold line. Next, I'll carefully align the cutting plate and hold it tight while running it through the machine. This ensures the shape cuts out while keeping the hinge intact. Putting pressure on the entire die would cut out the shape from the middle and I would be left with a hole and not a hinge. Now this looks good, but I'll need to trim away these extra parts using my craft mat, ruler, and craft knife, which should be easy. And just like that, I have my shape card ready. For the inside of the card, this is what I'll do. I'll apply some glue on the reverse side of this panel and align it with the shaped front and close the back of the card over it. Bingo! I now have the inside panel perfectly aligned and you don't see it from the top. Now it's time to work on the front panel, and let's begin by stamping. I'll use my Misty stamping tool again to ensure precise placement. I'll use two different inks for this part, starting with Hickory Smoke ink for the image. Since I'll heat emboss again, I want to avoid reheating and potentially melting any previous embossing, so I'll stamp both the image and sentiment first and then apply embossing powder. But the ink on the image might dry while I position and stamp the sentiment. And if the ink dries, the embossing powder won't stick. So here's what I'll do. I'll stamp the image first with Hickory Smoke. I'll clean the stamp and apply clear embossing ink over it and stamp the image again. Cleaning will prevent my embossing pad from getting contaminated, of course, and stamping with the clear embossing ink ensures the design stays wet longer. Next, I'm going to stamp the sentiment with the Peacock Feathers Distress Oxide and then finally apply embossing powder over everything all at once. So now I can heat emboss the sentiment and the image together in one go. I'll use my reverse tweezers, but I'll first let my heat gun run for a few seconds before I zap the card panel so it melts faster and the card panel doesn't get too warped. And I'm also making sure all the powder has melted. This is cute. Now all I need to do is mount this here and I am done. I'll apply quite a bit of glue over the foam tape so I can slide the panel around if I have to, since the alignment needs to be perfect, and I'll trim off the overhanging bit. I just purchased the Spellbinders non-stick shears during their Black Friday sale. I used to hear all the crafters talk about it and how it feels like butter. It's so smooth, etc. And now I can confirm it is. It's so effortless to cut with it. I'm loving it. Although this looks a little bit crooked here, I hope nobody is going to notice it much. So now you have a little place to write a note inside. And I'm done with this one, but the top edge here is really bothering me to no end. So I'm going to just trim off a little bit, and I think this is looking much better now. I know I'm a perfectionist, but sometimes it borders on obsessive, and that's not good. But there you have it. This is also done. The next card idea will give you another way to look at layering with shaped dies. Ready? Let's dive in. I used the Cheers stamp set this time, and here's what I did. I created the card base with Spellbinders Lilac Blossom cardstock, and it's pretty thick and nice heavyweight cardstock, so it was absolutely perfect for the card base. I used the Essentials Modern Oval die set by Spellbinders to cut out these ovals. I used the Simon Says Stamp eggplant cardstock layers with the largest and second largest dies for the panel with the design on it and for the sentiment. I used the third and second up from the smallest dies in this set to cut out the sentiment. I just trimmed off the sides to line them up with the edge of the card. To stamp the sentiment, I used Dusty Concord Distress Oxide to match the purple grapes and then heat emboss the sentiment again with clear embossing powder. Now for the image, I colored this with these Faber-Castell watercolor pencils. I don't get to use them a lot. They're beautiful colors, so I decided to give them a whirl. I just picked 2 purples and 2 greens. This set has 2 trays and you can find the exact color you're looking for. Once you color them in with the colored pencil, you just go in with a water brush and activate the color, pretty much like you saw me doing with the Distress Oxides. But instead of Distress Oxide, I used watercolor pencils for this one. I stamped the image outline with this waterproof dye ink. It's a really dark gray, so you can see the outline fairly well, but it's not really an in-your-face kind of black. This is called Flagstone and belongs to the Finesse line by Spectrum Noir. And you see it's waterproof. They also have an alcohol-proof ink, which I use when I'm doing alcohol coloring, and it's so convenient. I use some dimensional foam tape underneath to assemble this and to layer these up. The only thing left for me to do now is attach a white piece of cardstock inside so I can write a note, and then this card is finished. I also wanted to point out one thing. I didn't realize that the stamp set actually had this illustration at the back. And if I can show you the first card I made using this stamp set, I didn't quite get it right. I missed the branch here, and I thought this entire thing was a leaf. So that's why it looks like a big blob of green over here. But actually you can see the branch here in this card. Also for this one, I could have shifted the stamp a little bit more to the left so I was flush with this inside scored line that you can see for the border. You can see this beautiful etched line here, but anyway, it's not a deal breaker. Especially with difficult to use products, which I've honestly found these two stamp sets a bit of a challenge. I think that if you start with making a card that's a really obvious design, and then you step away from it for a day or two, it allows your creative juices to flow, and then you can come back with possibly more ideas. That's how I made the second card for each of the sets. Now, if you're looking for holiday card ideas, then I have a video just for that. It has 4 easy ideas for holiday cards and use some really basic supplies you probably already have in your stash. You should check out this video here.